The Forgotten Heiress. The first rays of dawn crept gently over the rolling hills of Masaka, painting the endless stretches of banana plantations with a golden glow that seemed to bless every leaf it touched. The morning mist lingered over the valleys like a white blanket, unwilling to surrender to the rising sun, while the cheerful songs of weaver birds and crested cranes echoed from the nearby swamps. Thin columns of smoke curled lazily from the grass-thatched huts scattered across the hillsides as women kindled cooking fires for the day's first meal. The scent of roasted sweet potatoes mingled with that of fresh earth dampened by the night's dew, creating the familiar fragrance that belonged only to the villages of Uganda. Goats bleated impatiently as children chased stubborn chickens from the compounds, and old men leaned on walking sticks outside their homes, discussing the harvest, the weather, and the ever-changing fortunes of life. In one of those quiet villages, tucked away where the red Murram road curved between towering jackfruit trees and ancient fig trees, there stood a modest but beautiful homestead that everyone knew belonged to one of the most respected families in the area. Their land stretched farther than the eye could comfortably measure, covered with thriving coffee plants, fertile banana gardens, grazing cattle, and fields that yielded enough food to feed not only the household, but many families during seasons of hardship. Wealth had never made the family proud. Instead, it had made them generous, and no traveler ever left their gate hungry. The owners of that homestead were a kind-hearted couple named Salongo Kato and his wife Namirembe. Their greatest treasure was not the fertile land, nor the healthy cattle that grazed peacefully beneath the acacia trees, nor the granaries filled with millet and maize. Their greatest treasure was their only daughter, a little girl named Nambi. From the day she was born, the elders declared that the child carried an unusual light in her eyes. She smiled easily, cried very little, and greeted everyone with a gentleness that melted even the hardest hearts. As she grew older, her beauty unfolded gradually, like the petals of a morning flower kissed by rain. Her skin glowed with the richness of polished ebony, her eyes sparkled with quiet intelligence, and her laughter drifted through the compound like the sweet notes of a flute. Yet it was not her beauty that made people love her. It was the way she shared her roasted cassava with children who had none, the way she greeted elders with deep respect, and the way she followed her mother through the gardens, eager to learn every task without complaint. Whenever visitors praised her, her mother would smile and say, "Beauty may invite people into your home, but character is what convinces them to stay." Years passed peacefully until tragedy arrived without warning. One rainy season, a terrible sickness swept through several villages around Masaka. Strong men who had spent decades tilling the soil suddenly became too weak to rise from their mats. Mothers who had sung lullabies only days before struggled to whisper their children's names. Herbalists worked tirelessly, prayers filled every home, and smoke from healing herbs rose day and night into the skies. But death paid little attention to human pleading. Within a single month, both Salongo Kato and Namirembe succumbed to the illness. The entire village mourned them. Women wailed until their voices grew hoarse, while men lowered their heads in sorrow as the couple were laid to rest beneath a great mvule tree overlooking the very land they had loved all their lives. Barely 10 years old, little Nambi stood silently between the graves, her small hands trembling as she watched the last handfuls of earth cover the only people who had ever made her feel completely safe. She wanted to cry until the heavens themselves answered, but no tears came. Grief had become too deep for tears. According to custom, the responsibility of raising the orphan fell upon her father's younger brother, a man named Senkungu. During the funeral, he wept louder than everyone else. He embraced Nambi before all the mourners and declared with dramatic sorrow that he would raise his late brother's daughter as though she were his own child. The elders nodded with approval, praising his generosity and reminding one another that blood should always protect blood. Nambi, frightened and lonely, believed every comforting word he spoke. She followed him to his home carrying only a small woven basket containing 2 dresses, a wooden comb that had belonged to her mother, and a faded bark cloth pouch filled with family keepsakes. As they walked away from her parents' homestead, she turned back one final time. The empty compound stood quietly beneath the afternoon sun, unaware that the little girl leaving its gate would not return. The kindness Senkungu displayed before the villagers vanished almost immediately after the funeral ceremonies ended. His wife, Nanziri, welcomed Nambi with a smile that disappeared before sunset. The very first morning, while the couple's own children remained asleep beneath warm blankets, Nambi was shaken awake long before dawn. She was ordered to fetch water from a spring nearly 2 miles away, gather firewood from the forest, sweep the compound, prepare porridge, wash clothes in the stream, weed the gardens, and tend the goats, before she was even allowed to eat a single mouthful. If a pot broke, she was blamed. If rain spoiled harvested cassava, she was blamed. If a chicken wandered into a neighbor's garden, somehow it was also her fault. Every mistake, whether hers or not, earned her harsh insults or painful beatings. Yet through it all, she rarely answered back. She simply lowered her head, a prayer her mother had taught her, and continued working with remarkable patience. The villagers noticed that the cheerful little girl who had once skipped happily along the village paths now walked with tired shoulders and roughened hands. Her clothes became faded and patched, while the soft skin of her palms hardened from years of endless labor. Whenever neighbors asked why such a young girl was always working, Nanziri would say, "A lazy child becomes a useless woman. We are simply preparing her for life." The explanation satisfied some, but not everyone. Old women sitting beneath mango trees often exchanged worried glances whenever Nambi passed, carrying bundles of firewood larger than herself. Some secretly called her over and slipped roasted groundnuts or ripe bananas into her hands. They whispered words of encouragement before sending her on her way, careful not to let Senkungu's family discover their small acts of kindness. Nambi always thanked them with the same humble smile, though sadness had begun to settle permanently behind her eyes. What no one except Senkungu and his wife knew was that their cruelty had never been about discipline. It was about land. Before his death, Salongo Kato had legally documented ownership of every acre he possessed, making it clear that everything belonged to his daughter until the day she married. Senkungu had expected his older brother to divide the property between them before death came, but fate had denied him that opportunity. The knowledge tormented him. Every time he looked across the fertile plantations that should have been producing wealth for him, bitterness tightened around his heart like a coiled python. "Why should all that land belong to one girl?" he often muttered after sharing calabashes of local brew with equally greedy friends. "A woman cannot even manage such property properly." His wife encouraged the poison growing inside him. "Night after night, as long as that girl remains here unmarried, those gardens can never truly become ours." Slowly, Senkungu began weaving a web of deception. He bribed a dishonest clerk from a nearby trading center to alter land records. He persuaded a few corrupt witnesses to sign papers claiming that his late brother had verbally entrusted everything to him before dying. Whenever village elders asked about the estate, he explained that managing the land while raising an orphan was an unbearable burden, yet one he accepted out of family loyalty. The performance earned him sympathy instead of suspicion. Meanwhile, Nambi remained completely unaware of the schemes unfolding around her. She believed the land still belonged to her parents' memory, and never imagined the uncle she called guardian was quietly stealing her inheritance piece by piece. Despite the hardships surrounding her, something within Nambi refused to be broken. Each evening, after everyone else had eaten, she carried the leftover scraps to an old blind woman who lived alone near the edge of the village. She, while drawing water from the well, and children often gathered nearby simply to hear her voice. She helped elderly neighbors weed their gardens whenever she finished her chores early, asking for nothing in return. More than once, she rescued lost goats and returned them to grateful owners without accepting rewards. People began saying that misfortune had covered her body like worn clothing, but it had failed to touch her heart. "Some people," one elder observed thoughtfully, "are like gold buried beneath mud. You may not see their shine immediately, but no amount of dirt can change what they truly are." One evening, after a particularly exhausting day in the fields, Nambi walked quietly to the graves of her parents. The moon hung low over the hills, bathing the cemetery in silver light while crickets filled the silence with their endless song. Kneeling between the two simple mounds of earth, she placed fresh wildflowers upon them, and finally allowed the tears she had hidden for years to flow freely. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling in the cool night air. "Mother, I have tried to be strong as you taught me. I have tried to honor your names, even when I am treated like someone who has none. Sometimes I wonder if you can still see me. Sometimes I wonder if you know how lonely I have become." A gentle breeze stirred through the branches above her, carrying with it the faint fragrance of blooming coffee flowers. She closed her eyes as the wind brushed against her face, and for a brief moment she felt as though unseen hands had rested gently upon her shoulders. She left the graves with no answers, but with a strange peace settling quietly inside her heart, unaware that far beyond the distant hills, destiny had already begun moving toward her with steady, unstoppable footsteps. Somewhere in the ancient kingdom of Bunyoro, a young man born to a throne was preparing to leave the comfort of a royal palace, disguising himself as the poorest traveler in the land, for reasons known only to himself. Neither he nor Nambi knew that the roads they were about to walk, though hundreds of miles apart, were destined to meet in a way that would change not only their own lives, but the fate of everyone who had ever wronged the orphan girl from the quiet hills of Masaka. News traveled differently through the villages of Uganda than it did through great towns. It did not race along paved roads carried by machines. It rode on the backs of traders, leading donkeys laden with baskets of tomatoes, on fishermen returning from the lakeshore before sunrise, on women selling smoked fish in crowded markets, and on old men whose ears seemed to collect every rumor carried by the wind. One afternoon, as the trading center buzzed with the usual sounds of bargaining voices and clinking coins, an elderly traveler from the west spoke of an unusual decree that had quietly spread through the distant kingdom of Bunyoro. He claimed that the young prince had disappeared from the royal palace months earlier, leaving behind only a letter for the king and queen. The letter simply stated that he wished to understand the lives of ordinary people before accepting the heavy crown that awaited him. Some believed he had become a wandering hunter. Others insisted he had disguised himself as a merchant, while many dismissed the story altogether as another tale invented to entertain travelers around evening fires. By the time the rumor reached Masaka, it had changed so many times that people laughed and returned to discussing coffee prices and the coming rains. No one imagined that hidden beneath those changing stories lay a truth that would one day shake their village to its foundations. Far away in Bunyoro, however, the story was painfully real. Prince Kato Rugaba had indeed walked away from the comforts of the palace. He had grown weary of hearing ministers praise him while poor farmers struggled to feed their children. He had listened to chiefs boast of justice while widows quietly lost their land to powerful relatives. One evening, after watching servants prepare yet another feast that could have fed an entire village, he removed the royal ornaments from his body, folded his embroidered robes with great care, and exchanged them for faded bark cloth and patched garments worn by ordinary travelers. He left behind his jeweled sandals and walked barefoot through the palace gates before dawn, carrying nothing more than a walking stick, a small bundle of clothes, and an old leather pouch containing only enough money to survive modestly. His father, the king, had opposed the idea fiercely, but in the end he recognized the determination in his son's eyes. Before allowing him to leave, he said quietly, "A king who has never known hunger can never understand a hungry nation. Go and learn what no palace can teach you, but remember who you are, even when no one else does." The prince traveled for months, crossing forests where monkeys leaped joyfully through towering trees, climbing hills that overlooked endless valleys, and sleeping beneath the stars more nights than he could count. He worked beside farmers in exchange for food, helped fishermen pull heavy nets from rivers, and shared meals with strangers who possessed almost nothing, yet willingly divided what little they had. Everywhere he went, he observed the true nature of people. He learned that wealth often hid empty hearts, while kindness frequently lived in the poorest homes. More than once he revealed neither anger nor pride when mocked for his worn clothing. Instead, he simply smiled and continued walking, storing every lesson carefully within his heart. The world, he often thought to himself, has a curious habit of revealing people's character by the way they treat those they believe can offer nothing in return. Back in Masaka, another difficult season had settled over Nambi's life. The rains had been generous, causing weeds to grow almost faster than crops themselves. Every morning before the first rooster crowed, Nanziri ordered her into the fields with a worn hoe balanced across her shoulders. The work stretched from sunrise until darkness swallowed the hills. While her cousins rested beneath mango trees during the hottest hours of the afternoon, Nambi remained bent over rows of beans and groundnuts, her hands blistered and her back aching. Yet whenever she returned home, there were more chores waiting. The cooking had to be done, water had to be fetched, firewood had to be gathered, clothes had to be washed. Sometimes she collapsed onto her sleeping mat, so exhausted that she fell asleep before finishing her evening prayers. One morning, as she carried 2 heavy clay pots toward the distant spring, she noticed an elderly man sitting beneath a large fig tree beside the narrow footpath. His clothes were torn almost beyond repair, his beard was white with age, and one of his legs appeared swollen, making it difficult for him to stand. Many villagers passed him without slowing their pace. Some feared he was a beggar who would ask for food they themselves could scarcely spare. Others simply pretended not to notice him. Nambi stopped immediately. She lowered her water pots onto the ground and knelt respectfully before the old man. "Grandfather," she said, "have you eaten today?" The old man smiled weakly. "Not since yesterday morning." Without hesitation, she untied the small banana leaf wrapped inside her basket. It contained the only food she had brought for herself that day, 2 pieces of cold sweet potato and a small roasted maize cob. She placed them gently into his trembling hands. "But child," the old man protested, "this is your meal." Nambi smiled with the quiet warmth that had never left her, despite years of suffering. Food satisfies hunger for only a little while. Kindness feeds the heart much longer. The old man looked at her carefully, as though trying to memorize every feature of her face. "May the road you have never imagined one day lead you home," he whispered. She thanked him politely, believing they were simply the words of a grateful stranger, then lifted her heavy pots and continued toward the spring. Hidden behind a cluster of bushes farther up the path stood another traveler who had witnessed everything. It was Prince Kato Rugaba. He had watched wealthy traders ride past the old man without offering even a greeting. He had watched farmers pretend not to hear his quiet plea for help. Yet this exhausted village girl, whose own clothes bore patches upon patches, had willingly surrendered the only food she possessed. The prince remained silent until she disappeared over the hill. Then he walked toward the old man, who smiled knowingly. "You have found another lesson, haven't you?" the elder asked. "I believe I have," the prince replied. "Some people carry riches inside them that cannot be stolen." Weeks passed and life continued much as before. But within Senkungu's household, impatience had begun replacing greed. Every document necessary to seize his late brother's property had almost been secured. Only one obstacle remained: Nambi herself. As long as she remained unmarried and alive, whispers about her inheritance would never completely disappear. One humid evening, after their children had fallen asleep, Senkungu and Nanziri sat beside the cooking fire, speaking in low voices. "This girl has become a burden," Nanziri muttered while stirring the dying embers with a stick. "People still remember whose daughter she is." Senkungu nodded grimly. "The elders asked too many questions." "Then send her away." "To where?" His wife's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Find her a husband. The poorer the better. Once she belongs to another family, no one will care what happens to her. They will stop talking about the land." A slow smile spread across Senkungu's face. "You are wiser than I gave you credit for." Within days, word spread across neighboring villages that Senkungu intended to marry off his niece. The announcement stirred considerable interest. Although everyone knew she lived in poverty, many also knew of her remarkable beauty and gentle character. Young men began speaking of her in marketplaces and along village paths. Farmers with respectable harvests expressed interest. Cattle keepers from neighboring districts sent relatives to inquire about her. Even the son of a prosperous trader announced his intention to visit. Senkungu welcomed every inquiry with exaggerated hospitality, secretly calculating which arrangement might bring him the greatest personal benefit. He cared nothing for Nambi's happiness. He cared only that once she crossed another man's threshold, every remaining tie between her and her parents' estate would begin to fade. Nambi learned of these plans not from her uncle, but from a neighbor's little daughter who innocently asked, "Is it true you're getting married soon?" The words struck her like unexpected thunder. She had never been consulted, never been asked whether she wished to marry. That evening she gathered enough courage to approach her uncle as he sat repairing a fishing net outside the house. "Uncle," she said, keeping her eyes lowered, "I heard people saying—" "You heard correctly," he interrupted without looking at her. "But I thought—" "You thought?" His voice hardened. "Since when do children think for themselves? I have fed you, clothed you, and raised you. I will decide where you belong." She swallowed painfully. "May I at least know the man?" "You will know him when I choose." Nambi quietly stepped away, the last fragments of control over her own life slipping through her fingers like dry sand. That night she lay awake, listening to the distant chorus of frogs after the evening rain. Tears rolled silently into her hair as she stared through the tiny opening in the thatched roof, where a single bright star shimmered against the darkness. She whispered the prayer her mother had taught her years ago, not asking for wealth or comfort, but simply for the courage to accept whatever tomorrow carried toward her. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow's road was already bringing an unassuming traveler, dressed in patched bark cloth and carrying nothing more than a walking stick, closer and closer to the village where fate had been patiently waiting for them both.